If we in any way want to do better or do history better, we have to be courageous.
That's why it's essential that we acknowledge the people upon whose backs this country was founded.
The more people understand someone else's perspective, the more likely they are to listen.
We're going to make a better future for ourselves. We need to.
I hope that in 30 or 40 years that conversations like this will not be necessary. I hope in 30 or 40 years we will look at each other and see each other as Americans.
I think that once people really know the history, I think then people will begin to have respect for one another.
This is not just Black history. This is America's story.
Miles away from the cities that make up Hampton Roads sits a lake that draws people away to escape the hustle and bustle of the 757.
This is such a serene place, standing out here at Lake Drummond. You know, there's no sound. You get a few birds coming. It's a place where people can come and get away from the big city life.
There's something comforting about this massive lake located in the middle of the Great Dismal Swamp. Silence and solitude exudes here at one out of 2 natural freshwater lakes in the Commonwealth. That powerful effect brings people back again and again. It not only encapsulates the feeling here, but the history far beneath the surface.
When I give presentations out, you know, to public groups, people either know about the Dismal Swamp, they maybe even have some history here, or they say, yeah, I've heard of it, it's over there somewhere, and they've never been here. So they either have a great connection to it or they don't. But I would think the majority don't know particularly the people side, the history of the people here in the swamp.
For 14 years, Chris Lowey has worked at the Great Dismal Swamp as a refuge manager. At one time, the swamp stretched over 1 million acres across Virginia and North Carolina. But today, it only claims over 112,000. For thousands of years, Native Americans called parts of the swamp home before North Carolina's first governor, William Drummond, saw the swamp and lake that's now named after him for the first time in 1655.
As I understand it, from what we have from the records, yeah, George Washington showed up in 1763 and saw this dark soil that would be good for farming. So, you know, drained the swamp a little bit, cut some trees down, tried the farming. It didn't work as well, but the timber industry did. And so the Dismal Swamp Land Company pretty much managed half of this refuge historically for the timber industry. That was up until about 1909, and then a private, timber company acquired the land in 1909 up until it became a refuge.
That happened in the early 1970s, but long before then, this place also held other secrets for hundreds of years, serving as not only a safe haven for wildlife, but up to 50,000 people.
As freedom seekers were coming north, they found refuge here in the swamp. And from what we understand is even for several generations, families lived here in the swamp, and they were free right up until the end of the Civil War.
The Great Dismal Swamp is the only underground railroad site that's located in 2 states, North Carolina and Virginia.
And for one Virginia man, that story is one he's worked years to tell.
The history says it's a place for healing, for new beginnings, a new start, and maybe a new leash on life as a nation to reconcile, heal, and restore people. That is part of our ultimate goal that you would think we would want in this country.
Eric Shepard moved to Hampton Roads after looking into his lineage back in 1996. Shepard worked for the government, but what he found down his line changed his job and his purpose.
My thoughts that I've been handed a treasure, a life-changing moment in my history, and part of his legacy. I feel obligated to continue what he started in terms of reconciliation, freedom, restoration for a people. So that's become my life's work now, and his legacy continues.
He is Shepherd's ancestor Moses Grandy, who lived in the area in the 17 and 1800s.
Moses Grandy, he was a waterman on the Dismal Swamp Canal, but as a child, he was, of course, born in enslavement here in North Carolina area. And he got some experience being hired out to different plantations owners and on the ferry boat down there in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And as he got older, his owner at the time made a deal with him working on the Dismal Swamp Canal as a waterman that he would allow Moses to keep some of his earnings. And with that, Moses was able to earn enough money to buy his freedom 3 times. And once he finally did, he went up to the northern states, Providence, Rhode Island first, and then on to Boston, Massachusetts. And before he went over to London, England to have his narrative published, he was living in Portland, Maine.
Grandy's famously known as having his own slave narrative published in 1842. But it's his connection to Lake Drummond that Shepherd can still feel the presence of to this day.
Moses had to buy his freedom, had to purchase his freedom 3 times. And while he was attempting to do so for the 3rd time, he got sick and he needed a place to heal up. And it took him about a year to get healed. And as he describes in the slave narrative, he was camped out on Lake Drummond and surrounded by the wildlife and everything, but it gave him a chance to heal up. And when he was ready to go back out and earn some money, he earned enough to buy his freedom. And so that's the significance, I feel, that Lake Drummond brings to the process of healing, not only from the past, but healing as a nation right now.
Healing through learning about the stories like Grandy's and being in the wildlife here. It's a unique place, and that's why it's not only a national wildlife refuge, but part of the Underground Railroad network to freedom, a place that has so much to offer for people to rest, remember, and reconcile.
It's such a gem of the district.
We went to the nation's capital to speak with Congressman Donald McEachin, who represents Virginia's 4th Congressional District, including the Great Dismal Swamp. For the past couple of years, McEachin sponsored legislation to get the wildlife refuge turned into a National Heritage Area.
I probably learned about it later on in life when I was in college and after college even. But I'd heard of it, right? You can't grow up in Virginia without hearing about the Dismal Swamp. And I have to admit that the first time I went there, it didn't look dismal, nor did it look like a swamp, which was surprising to me. So I think the county and the state have done a great job of keeping it up and making it accessible for tourists. And I hope these efforts will enhance that.
There are currently 55 National Heritage Areas across the country. They're places the National Park Service describes as nationally important landscapes made up of cultural, historic, and natural resources. Unlike national parks, the federal government doesn't own them, and people can live in these areas. The designation by Congress allows them, and possibly in the future the swamp, to have public-private partnerships to promote preservation, tourism, recreation, conservation, and more to help the sites. But the bill hasn't been passed yet.
The challenge is that we have to do things a certain way in Washington. So the first thing is a study, and the study has passed. And so we'll get, once the Secretary of Interior does their work and the study is complete, I anticipate that we'll bring back a bill that will finish the job. But for whatever reason, we're going to have to study it first. I don't think it needs to be studied, but that's the process here.
McEachin is hopeful about the outcome and says the inspiration behind the bill actually came from his early days in Virginia's General Assembly after seeing that the state's budget included funding to groups to upkeep Confederate graves.
So I thought to myself, and I said to others, that if we're going to preserve history, we need to preserve it all and not just do it piecemeal. And from that began my quest to try to locate and find slave graves, which I didn't finish that project. It was actually finished by Dolores McQuinn, who's a member of the House of Delegates even today.
McEachin says that work spilled over to his time as a congressman in the legislation for the Great Dismal Swamp. He believes that what could be accomplished here could help many learn.
I don't think this is just a Virginia thing. You know, we've certainly had help from our colleagues in North Carolina with this, and of course both of our U.S. senators have helped me with this effort as well. But I really believe this is a nationwide thing. I think if we do it right, and I think we can do it right, this will become a national attraction that people will be, you know, just like they go to Williamsburg, they'll want to go to the Dismal Swamp and see what's there and enjoy it and learn from it.
And back at the Great Dismal Swamp, they're hoping that if the bill is passed, the funds that come from it will additionally help in those areas of education and conservation to keep what's still here around for the future.
One of our big priorities is to try to slow the drainage, to re-wet the swamp, and make the wetland a wetland again. And wetlands are very important for many reasons, right? They filter pollutants in our waterways. They reduce flooding effects to downstream communities. They'll help prevent wildfires by what we're trying to do of re-wetting the swamp. So, yeah, we do have concern, and so our management priorities are to, you know, restore the ecosystem as much as we can. We're never going to take it back to what it was, but the goal is healthy and resilient going into the future, whatever that might be with climate change and other disturbances.
And from Shepard's side, he's working to continue to build relationships that also last long into the future. He leads Underground Railroad tours in Hampton Roads, and through his company Mubita, he offers Africa homecoming pilgrimages to descendants of those who were enslaved.
The kingdom in Zambia abolished in the early 1800s, their 10th king abolished the slave traders from coming through their land. And some of the Angolans who were escaping the slave traders ran into the kingdom for refuge. And here in the U.S., the Great Dismal Swamp was a refuge for wildlife, but also for humanity, those who were escaping slavery here. So you match the two to tell both stories on both sides. You bring the parts of the pieces of the puzzle together for ultimately healing from Africa and Europe, and also was definitely needed here in the United States.
Shepard says they're working on a strategic tourism partnership with Zambia and the Great Dismal Swamp to help make these stories told more, with the creation of a Moses Grandy Center in the country and one here named after the Zambian king who helped in the slave trade.
By exchanging the history of both countries and both ethnic groups, which are part of one of the same ethnic group, really, that we have good relationships. We develop relationships over time. That's the job and the role of my company, is to see that that happens.
While it's been 200 years since his ancestor Moses Grandy found refuge here at Lake Drummond, Shepard hopes a permanent reminder of the man whose story inspired him will go here. He's proposing that pier at Lake Drummond will be named the Moses Grandy Pier. It's a testament to both men who both found healing and inspiration along these shores. Grandy used the proceeds from his narrative to free enslaved relatives, as well as share the horrors of slavery. Shepard is using his healing to help heal others with their own journey, and also helping to teach about the full story. He's proud of the work he's done, the stories he's helped start along these banks, and believes that Grandy is too.
I hope that he would say, well done, my good and faithful descendant, that you went out there and you continued it on, not just for him, but for all of the ancestors who needs this healing, not only for themselves, but for their descendants as well. So it's enough room for everybody. It's just not an Eric Shepard movement. It's a healing movement that's needed in this country.